The member from Kitchener-Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Public dollars are being used for partisan advertising in this province. The Auditor General saw a recent ad and said she had concluded that the primary objective of this ad is to foster a positive impression of the government. This ad would not have passed her review prior to the Act's amendments on June 6, 2015. This Premier is planning to restrict political advertising on just about every issue in the 6 months prior to the election campaigns going forward. Why is partisan government advertising the exception?
Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll remind the member opposite actually that we're the government that brought in legislation around partisan advertising, Mr. Speaker, and we brought it in because of the practices of the previous government, Mr. Speaker, where the Premier of the day was front and centre in
Premier.
where the Premier of the day was front and centre in ads, Mr. Speaker. It is true, giving people information about what this government is doing, Mr. Speaker. The climate change ad, Mr. Speaker, is an extremely important piece of public information, Mr. Speaker. You know, I think that it would be hard to argue that action on climate change is a partisan issue, Mr. Speaker. And if the NDP wants to argue that taking action on climate change is a liberal initiative, so be it, Mr. Speaker. It's the greatest threat that's facing mankind.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Premier mentioned climate change, because if a group of concerned citizens wanted to run an advertisement 6 months before an election saying all parties need to do more about climate change, they would face significant restrictions by her government. If a group of parents wanted to run advertisements months before an election saying that children with autism need better supports, they would face significant restrictions. But if the government runs ads that the Auditor General says are essentially self-promotion, they can spend as much as they want, completely drowning anyone else out. This seems like it is more about shutting down anyone criticizing the Liberals than it is about election fairness. Why does this Premier plan to clamp down on non-partisan advertising by advocacy groups and citizens of this province, but she will continue to allow the government to spend as much as it wants on partisan advertising?
Question. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting that how NDP is choosing to debate the draft legislation that is before the committee for public hearing here in the legislature, while they have refused at every stage of the process to engage and participate and give their feedback when that draft legislation was written, Speaker. Speaker, that is why we have taken the unprecedented step of taking the draft legislation and has referred that legislation, Speaker, to the committee after first reading. It has not yet even been debated in the House, Speaker, so that we can hear from Ontarians across the province and be able to improve upon the legislation, the draft bill, Speaker. I urge the member that I hope she stops worrying about her vacation planning while what she has been talking about in the committee, and actually take the time and travel the province, listen to experts, listen to Ontarians, so that we can amend that bill, we can make it stronger, and bring it back here in September for second reading debate. Thank you, Speaker.